So which is better, prime lens or zoom? Well, I guess it just depends on what you're trying to do. What are the main differences between the two? Well, a prime lens generally will be lighter and tends to be smaller, but not always. It's also going to be one specific focal length. Now, the advantage of that is that it generally has a larger constant aperture. This lens goes down to a 1.8 aperture. This zoom lens is a fantastic lens. It is a 24 to 105 millimeter zoom lens, but the lowest constant aperture of this lens is f4. So it's a full 2 stops less light that gets through. Now, if I'm using this in a studio setting, that's fine. And it's going to come out nice and sharp, but I can't really use it in lower light. Now, I use this in lower light because it has a larger aperture. So if I'm in a place with challenging light that's going to change all the time, I don't want to have to crank up my ISO a bunch and add in a bunch of digital noise into a photo, or if I'm filming into my filming, it's just not going to look great. And even at post-processing, you're not going to be able to get usable footage out of that necessarily. So it's going to offer you far more use case scenarios as far as aperture. This will be far more versatile. If you have optimal light, this is a fantastic lens for everything. Now, this is a 150 to 600 millimeter zoom lens. Look at that bad boy. Now, this doesn't have a constant aperture. It goes from f5 to f6.3. So light is always going to be a challenge with this lens. So when we're talking about that is very use case specific. I use that for photographing the moon whenever you have a full moon, because you're looking basically directly at a light source, and you can close that down and still get a sharp picture and have enough light. Or in bright daylight, if we're photographing wildlife or something like that, because you can still have a high shutter speed and have that wide open and it'll still work. But in low light, that's unusable. There's no way that I could even begin to use it. So it's going to be based off of certain scenarios. Right now, what I'm filming on is a 50 millimeter f1.4. And what else it's going to do, the same way that this is giving me this blurred out background with the higher aperture of this is actually at 1.4. Actually, I have it set at 1.8. Because of that, you can see that I've got a better separation from my background, because the door behind me is not very far behind me. It's less than 10 feet from behind me, but it looks further just because there's some separation from the background due to the higher aperture. Now, why does that matter as well? If I'm shooting something like indoor sports, I can shoot at a higher shutter speed. So the reason why I'd want to shoot at a higher shutter speed is because I want to freeze my subject. So if we have somebody playing basketball and I'm trying to get an action shot of them, if I'm not shooting, probably for kids, at least 1/500th of a second, but really once you get into high school and above, you're looking at least 1/1000th of a second. And unless you're able to have a wide open aperture, you're not going to have much use for it. So you will need to go to a prime lens. But if you want to have a zoom lens that is going to be able to get to a lower aperture, say, 2.8, which is generally about as low as a zoom lens is going to go. I have a 70 to 200 zoom lens that is f2.8, and it is a fantastic lens. But it's impossibly expensive. Brand new, that lens is $3,000 US at the time of this filming. Now, this, which is a very versatile lens, is an f4. So that's only one stop less. The construction, it is a heavy lens, but the 70 to 200 is far heavier. It's an all metal housing. It's got way more glass in it, and because of the wider aperture, it's nearly 3 times as expensive as this, even though it's only one stop different. And this is a zoom lens. Whereas this 35 millimeter f1.8 macro lens, which is pretty versatile up close and you can use it in a lot of different environments, this runs for 400 on a used market, less than that sometimes. So it's all going to be your use case scenario, and it's going to be what you can afford on top of that. If you were going to get one lens, having a zoom lens is a great starter. This is so versatile, and you can use it in so many different scenarios. And as I said, there's another version of this. This is an RF 24 to 105 f4. The other version of this, the 2.8 version, is a magnificent lens, but this can be had for around $1,200 or $1,300, and that lens is right around 3,000 US dollars. So it's a massive difference in price. Now, it's going to be more versatile, and if you're using it in a professional setting, it's almost a no-brainer. But for anybody coming in and stepping in and they want to walk around lens, something that you can take some portraits with, do some things for family, and also film with, you really can't go wrong with this lens. That's why I love this lens. This lens has been something that has really been a workhorse for me. It almost never comes off my camera. I'm starting to venture out into other things right now where I don't use it quite as much. But this lens I've done portraits with, landscapes, filming, you name it, just about everything I've done with it. However, it is limited when you're talking about certain lighting conditions. I can use it in some indoor settings, say an indoor gymnasium, but every gymnasium is not created equally. Some high schools have fantastic facilities and you're going to have great lighting and it's never going to be an issue. But sometimes you're going to have spotty lighting in different portions of the gym and you're going to have inconsistent performance. And especially if you need to have a higher shutter speed for fast sports action, it will be less useful than something that is a full stop bigger, and it does make a big difference. But it's going to make a big difference on your pocketbook as well. You have to decide what's going to work for you. But for me, if you're just starting out and you're going to get a full frame camera, you really can't go wrong with this. 24 millimeters is about as wide as you tend to need to shoot very often, unless you're doing some sort of extreme landscape shot. Not that there's not a great use for 16 millimeter. I just find myself never using that, and I'm rarely on the low end side of this lens, which is the 24 millimeter. Everything in between is super useful, and if you're just learning and you're trying to get use out of this, this is going to take you a long way. You're going to be able to travel with it. It's light. It's so versatile. I would try and go with this, and then eventually, once you want to venture into something more specific, I've done a lot of fantastic macro photography with this. This is really great, and it's inexpensive relatively. I mean, I don't want to act like something that's $400 to $500 is inexpensive. That's a good sum of money. But if you're getting use out of it, there's value in it, and cost is only a concern in the absence of value. So this is going to be something that is going to be really valuable to you if you like to do macro photography. It's great with food. It's great with, showing texture of products. If you're going to take pictures of bugs, there's a number of things. I also have a 100 millimeter macro, but I find myself not using that either. Sometimes when you go on one extreme end to another, you're not using it as often. Right now, I haven't been using the 24 to 105. I've actually been using the 70 to 200. I've really fell in love with that. I think that's something that as you go along in your journey of getting better and better, you tend to gravitate towards different things like that. And that's just what I've had to use for me. I went through a party this past weekend, and I used my 35 millimeter, my 50 millimeter, but about 85% of the time I was using my 70 to 200 f2.8, and it allowed me to get some fantastic shots in very challenging lighting that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to get with my 24 to 105.1, not having the reach of a 200 millimeter and everything in between there and the 70 millimeter, but also just dealing with challenging light, different colored lighting, blue, purples, reds, things like that, that I didn't have to account for in camera as much, and I was able to account for in post-processing with a lot of those. So if you want to check some of those photos out, you can go to my site, fbimaging.com. Check out the links in this video. It helps the channel. I'll link all of these lenses, or all the things that I use in there as well. You can follow me on Instagram. It's fb_imaging. And look me up, fbimaging.com, and email me at fbimagingvegas@gmail.com. Thanks, and have a great day.